everybody to this SYSTRAN Tech Talk. My name is Ken Behan, and today we'll be looking at the impact that language AI is having on eDiscovery. So first things first, when did discovery become eDiscovery? As you're probably all well aware, back at the turn of the century, we saw the production, far more production of everything from emails to Word documents, Excels, PowerPoints, lots of communication beginning to happen digitally. So whether it was an instant message or an email that was received, these became vital parts of evidence in the discovery process. Hence the need to add E in front of it, electronic discovery. The interesting part is that as this emerged, we also saw the impact on these huge amounts of data that suddenly became available from an evidence perspective. And that presented a whole new challenge with products like Relativity, as you use today, becoming available and simplifying that process and being able to help you find that needle in the haystack. In parallel to that, though, we also saw the increase in global commerce. And for example, I may have been involved in building a bridge in Brazil, and I had an Argentinian subcontractor involved and a Canadian architect. Now, something goes wrong, and then suddenly now have French, Spanish, and Brazilian Portuguese, as well as English, as part of my eDiscovery content. And hence the need for the first part of language AI, which is machine translation. Now, machine translation itself isn't new per se. It's been around since the 60s, and in fact, SYSTRAN was founded in 1968. And the first products within machine translation, or the first commercially available products, which were in the mid to late 70s that were available, were based on what's known as a rules-based engine. So as a result, you got a decent enough quality, but there was a huge amount involved in getting that quality anywhere near the ability for it to be used. Move forward to the 90s, and at the start of the 90s, what we did get in place were what was known as statistical engines. And these became better than the original rules-based, although they became slower. But the bigger impact was that it gave you a much better gist of what was being said. So this was the first sort of real revolution in the language AI space. Move forward again to 2016, and suddenly you have the emergence of neural machine translation. And this is the first time that it really becomes very effective to use machine translation in not just the eDiscovery process, but in many, many different workflows. SYSTRAN partnered originally with Relativity, which was about 6 years ago. The question was around, is it better to use a machine than it is to use humans? Because ultimately, the first phase is to find the needle in the haystack, even if it's in a language we don't understand. One of the things that neural machine translation brought with it was the whole idea that you no longer need humans in the loop. The quality is that good for the eDiscovery process. Now, this doesn't take away from the fact that you do need, if you're going to present evidence, you need to have it legally translated. And we haven't yet got there from a machine translation perspective. But one of the most important things that suddenly emerged since around 2017, 16, 17, was the ability to have a much higher quality of output from the engines. When we start looking at the discovery process, yes, all machine translation that's neural is very good, but what other aspects do we need to look at? So one of the first one is domain, and let me define what I mean by domain. So it could be a legal domain, it could be a medical, life science domain, it could be an automotive domain, it could be a financial domain. And it's very important, and one of the common mistakes I see our customers making is they believe they need a legal domain for eDiscovery, when in fact what they really need to be doing is looking at what kind of case is this? Is it a financial case? So therefore the content itself is going to be very much swayed towards financial. So my advice in that area is, first of all, figure out what the case is, and from there, select the correct domain that suits the translation that's going to be occurring. The second area that needs to be looked at is dictionaries. And what dictionaries do is give you the ability to make sure that you have the correct translation of the words that are being translated. Many words have many different meanings when they go from one language to another, but they will be very specific depending on the domain that the case resides in. So this is a handier way of making sure that what is being translated relates to what you're searching for. Another area that you can look at is training an engine in the specific domain. If, say, for instance, there is a lot of data you already have in the financial sector and you specialize in legal cases within that area, you may want to look at customizing an engine specifically for that domain itself. Another important area to be cognizant of is the ability to auto-detect language. So you have a huge amount of data. What you really want to be able to do is let the system handle it. So give it all the data and let it figure out what languages are what and do the translation for you. The other side of that coin is the ability to have a document or an instant message that has multiple languages within it. So it's very important that if I'm looking at a document and I can't figure out what languages are in it, but the system can, and it translates all of them and makes it available within Relativity in English. One of the other challenges that's emerging is the amount of data that's available and the time that you have available. Time seems to be shrinking, amount of data is growing exponentially. So as a result, you need the ability to grow the available processing power of the technology that you're going to use. So I would always advise, make sure that you're looking at what technology is for today, but also can be upgraded into the future. For instance, with SYSTRAN, you can add compute nodes, you can run it on GPUs, and you can grow it out to 58 different languages. So you've got that flexibility built into it, but it's one of the emerging areas. It started, there were megabytes of data, and then there were gigabytes of data. And today it's not uncommon to see terabytes of data needed. One customer recently had 2 terabytes of data and they needed it done within 3 days. A big challenge, and it's important that the technology that you use is scalable to meet those needs. Machine translation is one of 3 elements within language AI, the second being audio. And although audio as a challenge has been around for quite some time, we've had mobile since the mid-90s, it has become more and more of a challenge due to the fact that more and more people are using different technologies such as Skype and Zoom, as well as traditional phone calls. But there's many, many different ways now for people to communicate from an audio perspective. How does this impact the eDiscovery process? Well, the first part of where it impacts it is the gathering of that data and bringing those files together. And typically they're in WAV or MP3 format. Typically, when we think of audio, we think in terms of landlines or mobile phones. But what we're seeing now, and especially with the pandemic that we're currently going through, is the use of other platforms such as Zoom, Skype for Business, chat rooms, and all of this can be presented as evidence that needs to be transcribed. So typically how you will do this, again, you organize your files. You don't have to worry about organizing them into different language batches. The SYSTRAN system will look after that for you. You upload the files into Relativity, and then the system just goes off and starts off by transcribing it and then translating it. So all the audio information is now available for searching in English. But one area that we do need to be cognizant of is that there are 2 people communicating on a call, and do you need the identification of person 1, person 2, as it pertains to evidence that's being gathered. The final element of language AI, the third element, is anonymization. And again, this goes back as from a technology perspective was redaction back and has been around since the 50s, the 60s. And really focused on manually redacting files, so literally getting a marker and putting it through a document and removing sensitive information that way. There are many systems today that emulate that in a digital format, but the challenge still exists when you read back that particular format of how easy is it to read. And also it can be put on a layer, and that can be a bigger challenge in that there are programs available where you can remove the layer, so the redaction itself becomes totally ineffective. We approached this with Reed Smith, and what we did was we looked at it first and well, what is the challenge here? And the challenge really is to make the information anonymized. The first step in all of this is we take the English text and we look at all the sensitive data that's there, and then we represent the document in a fashion where it has been anonymized using characters instead of the words. An alternative way of doing this, by the way, is to use pseudo-anonymization, and this is where it starts to change a name from John to James or Paul, and a place name to a totally different place name. And the beauty of this is that somebody can then read that information and can see very clearly what was originally stated. So why is anonymization important? Well, as you're probably aware, privacy has become more and more important to the individual, and laws have been passed, GDPR in Europe, CCPA in California, and there's also an emergence of standards in Asia. The prime motivators behind the anonymizer is the ability to transfer information between offices and make sure that you are still in compliance with the laws, whether it's from Europe to the US, whether it's within the US, or as I say, moving forward into the future, I'm pretty sure that Asia will have similar rules as well that will need to be adhered to. What's the future hold? Well, I think one of the things we're seeing overall is the emergence within language AI of the importance of sentiment analysis and the ability to start relating different pieces of content to each other in their native language. And I think this is going to become an area that becomes more and more important within eDiscovery as we start looking at how do I connect this piece of information with this piece of information, with this phone call that was made, or with these pictures. And I think the ability to understand images and what's in images and to attach that to a phone call or a document and so on and so forth is going to become more and more relevant over time. And that's it for me today. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you found what we talked about interesting. If you need further information, my email is here, and please pop me a mail. I'd be delighted to have a chat with you. Thanks for your time. Bye-bye. What happens if you end up in a situation where a piece of maybe it's an instant message on premise and behind your firewall, or you can. So that's the second one is video. And as we're all aware, video has become audio. Machine translation is one of 3 elements of language I/O. Hey, let's try that again. Machine translation is just one element of language AI. The other 3, let me start that again. Why am I going on with this? This can be a big challenge, especially when it comes to GSM, which is a very tough. Why am I talking like this?